Picture yourself kneeling in a trench filled with freezing sludge in 1595 Hungary. The air reeks of sulfur and unwashed bodies. To your left, a German mercenary saws the leg off a dead horse to eat it raw. At your right, a cannonball decapitates a willow tree. But you're not holding a weapon, you're clutching a delicate polished viola da gamba, terrified the damp air will warp its wood. You are Claudio Monteverdi, age 28, and if a single stray bullet finds you in this wasteland, the future of Western music dies with you. No opera as we know it, just a corpse in the mud. This is the Siege of Esztergom, a meat grinder that didn't care about art, genius, or legacy. Before we witness how this nightmare reshaped Europe, hit that like button and subscribe. Tell me in the comments, what's the most out-of-place object you've ever heard of in a war zone? Now, let's step onto the most dangerous real estate on Earth in the late 16th century, the collision point between cross and crescent. For 50 years, the Ottoman Empire had used Esztergom fortress as a shield, blocking the road to their occupied capital. At Buda, the Habsburg emperors in Vienna stared at this fortress with obsession, and this time they sent a chaotic, multinational mob to take it back. General Karl von Mansfeld peers through his spyglass and sees a mathematical problem. Esztergom sits on a precipice protected by the massive Danube River and steep jagged cliffs, a masterpiece of defensive geography. Taking it requires engineering, not just courage. Thousands of sappers dig lines toward the city walls like veins of infection, their pickaxes competing with Ottoman artillery thunder. Inside those walls, the Janissaries watch and wait. They're elite household troops of the Sultan, and they know no relief force is coming. Their only hope is to make the Christians bleed until they give up. Down in camp, the Christian League tears itself apart. Italian insults fly at German pikemen. Hungarian hussars spit at Walloon mercenaries. This isn't a disciplined legion, it's a Tower of Babel armed with gunpowder. Hovering over them all is typhus, the Hungarian disease, turning strong men into shivering skeletons overnight. Monteverdi tries tuning his instrument, but humidity snaps a string. Sound makes him flinch like a pistol shot. Outside, heavy siege guns pound the water town while Ottoman return fire screams overhead. This isn't a battle of heroes, it's a grinding industrial accident. To understand why a musician from Mantua was freezing in a Hungarian ditch, we need to zoom out. The map of late 16th century Europe showed a jagged scar running through Hungary, the military frontier, a lawless zone where peace was just a word. For decades, it had been a constant low-level bloodbath of raids, slave-taking, and burning villages. But in 1593, everything changed. An Ottoman governor's overambitious raid was routed at the Battle of Sisak in Croatia. The psychological shock was massive. The invincible Ottoman war machine had stalled. Emperor Rudolf II, more interested in alchemy than armies, stopped paying tribute to the Sultan. The truce shattered, reigniting into what we call the Long War. Geography explains why Esztergom mattered so much. The Danube River is Central Europe's main artery. Control it, and you control supplies, troops, and gold. Esztergom sits on a river, bend that acts like a padlock. For the Ottomans, it was the northernmost shield protecting Buda, held since 1541. For the Habsburgs, it was a knife against their throat, uncomfortably close to Vienna and Bratislava. Taking it would open the road to liberating Hungary. This wasn't just a siege, it was a test of strength between two civilizations. If you walked through the Christian camp in July 1595, you'd be hit by the noise of 1,000 arguments in 10 different languages. The Pope and Emperor called this the Christian League, implying unity, but in reality it was a geopolitical Frankenstein's monster. At the core were German and Walloon Landsknechts, professional mercenaries known for flamboyant sleeves, massive pikes, and thirst for beer. War was their job. You fought, got paid, or mutinied if payment was late. Then came the Italians sent by the Pope, technocrats bringing the latest artillery ideas. Germans saw them as soft, perfumed Southerners. Italians viewed Germans as uncouth barbarians. Fights erupted over food, firewood, women, and theology. The Hungarians were fighting for their homes, watching these foreign liberators with deep suspicion since. Germans often treated Hungarian peasantry as badly as the Ottomans did. Managing this chaos was Mansfeld's nightmare. Orders had to be translated from German to Latin to Italian or Hungarian. A command to hold the line could be misinterpreted as charge, leading to disaster. The camp was physically segregated by nationality, 3 separate armies pretending to be one, yet they shared one realization: Esztergom would not fall easily. High above the Christian camp, inside the fortress, there was only disciplined silence of trapped men. Most Janissaries weren't born Turks, they were born Christians in the Balkans. Taken as children under the Devshirme system, converted and forged into the Sultan's weapon. They had no families or lands. Kors was their father, the Sultan. Their god. Commander Kara Ali Pasha looked down at the sprawling enemy camp and saw grim mathematics. He had roughly 3,000 to 5,000 men against an army 10 times that size. But Esztergom was a layered death trap. The Ottomans had spent 50 years modernizing it with thick, earth-packed ramparts to absorb cannonballs, murder holes, and overlapping fields of fire. Their greatest terror wasn't artillery, but silence. From the river, Esztergom's survival depended entirely on the Danube supplies, gunpowder. And reinforcements came by boat from Buda. The Christians were maneuvering to blockade it. Inside the barracks, soldiers listened to the rhythmic thump. Coming from underground, Christian sappers were digging. And there's a specific horror to knowing that beneath your feet, men crawl through darkness, packing barrels of gunpowder. You cannot fight an enemy you cannot see. But there was no talk of surrender the frontier. Code was brutal, and for a Janissary, cowardice was worse than death. While cannons pounded stone walls, silent massacre unfolded in the tents. It started with headache, then relentless fever, then black spots and delirium. Men who survived hand-to-hand combat collapsed while standing guard, drowning in their own fluids. They called it the Hungarian disease. Today we know it as typhus. It wasn't air or water but lice, moving freely in cramped, filthy conditions. The July and August heat turned camp into an incubator. Thousands of horses and men, open latrines, rotting refusal, baking under relentless sun. Chronicles described fly clouds so thick they blackened the sky. This invisible enemy didn't care about rank. Mansfeld watched his roster shrink every morning, losing engineers and gunners he needed to break Esztergom. The siege became a race against biology. Weather didn't help erratic from the Little Ice Age. Torrential downpours turned trenches into canals. Soldiers stood knee-deep in water for days as trenchfoot set in. Monteverdi, huddled with his damp instrument, must have wondered if this was the world's end. Mansfeld was ruthless, ordering the sick moved to the rear and forcing the healthy to work double shifts. The desire to take Esztergom, to escape this hellhole and get under a roof, became desperate, feverish obsession. If the surface was a slaughterhouse, underground was a tomb. Mansfeld knew cannons alone wouldn't crack Ottoman walls reinforced. With earth that absorbed iron balls like a sponge, he turned to mining. Imagine being a sapper, likely a coal miner from Saxony, crawling through a tunnel barely wider than your shoulders. The only light comes from a flickering candle. Your job? Dig under the foundations, prop the roof with wooden beams, pack the chamber with black powder barrels, set fire to the beams, and run. The beams burn, the roof collapses, powder ignites, and gravity does the rest. But the Ottomans weren't deaf. They placed bowls of water on cellar floors, watching for ripples, listening for pickaxes. When they found Christian tunnels, they dug countermines, resulting in nightmarish combat. Breaking through dirt, you'd stare face to face with an Ottoman miner in darkness. No room for swords or musketsmen fought with pickaxes and knives, stabbing in pitch blackness, sometimes buried alive. By late August, Mansfeld's engineers had successfully undermined the Watertown walls. The fuse was lit. The ground rippled, then a volcanic eruption of earth, stone, and smoke. A massive wall section disintegrated, laying Esztergom's insides bare. The shield of Islam had been cracked, but Mansfeld didn't order the immediate charge. He looked past crumbling walls to the river, where a massive pontoon bridge connected Esztergom to Parkany Fortress on the opposite bank. Small boats had been slipping supplies across at night. As long as that bridge stood, Esztergom was unkillable. Mansfeld turned to the Christian flotilla. It was time to sever the artery. What followed was chaotic naval warfare on river barges and floating platforms. The Christian fleet attacked, while Mansfeld sent troops to storm the Parkany bridgehead. The bridge became a death bottleneck, a narrow wooden walkway, swaying violently, packed shoulder to shoulder. The front ranks clashed with no room to maneuver. Falling meant hitting water in 30 pounds of steel armor, sinking like a stone. The Danube ran red that day. Corpses bobbed in eddies. Then came fire-burning rafts and incendiary devices ignited the dry timber. The bridge broke apart in burning chunks. The Janissaries on the Parkany side watched in horror as their connection to Esztergom drifted away. The garrison was now truly alone, no more food, powder, or hope from Buddha. The shield of Islam had become an island in a sea of enemies. September 2nd, 1595. The sun rose over a scene like an open wound. The mine explosion had torn a massive gap, not a neat doorway, but a ragged slope of pulverized stone and bodies. The forlorn hope went first. Volunteers promised double pay or pardons, scrambling up loose rocks while Ottoman musketeers poured fire into them. What happened next was a meat grinder. In the narrow choke point, tactics dissolved into crush. German Lanzknechts hacked at wooden palisades. Italian musketeers fired point-blank into smoke. Janissaries threw clay pot grenades filled with gunpowder. And glass poured boiling oil and molten lead. The noise was indescribable. Thousands screaming in rage and pain. Punctured by musket cracks, inch by inch, sheer Christian numbers prevailed. Attackers climbed over their own comrades' bodies to reach the breach top. As they spilled into Watertown streets, battle disintegrated into hundreds of individual duels. Long pikes were useless in alleyways. Men used knives, rocks, gun butt stocks. They fought in houses, cellars, burning mosque ruins. The Ottoman defense broke. Those not cut down fled to the upper castle citadel. The Watertown had fallen. Streets were slick with blood. Christian soldiers, fueled by months of misery and survival adrenaline, began sacking the lower city. Mansfeld kept eyes on the prize. The upper castle loomed above, gates shut tight, surviving garrison crammed inside. By early September, guns finally stopped. The lower town was smoking ruins. The upper castle, completely cut off, had garrison drinking muddy water and eating boiled leather. Kara Ali Pasha knew the math no longer worked. No relief force, only death or negotiation. You chose negotiation. The surrender came with honors of war. Surviving Janissaries and civilians marched out under their banners, carrying personal weapons but leaving heavy guns and the city behind. Thousands walked toward Ottoman lines, eyes fixed on ground, leaving the fortress they'd called home for 50 years. The Holy League had won. The cross replaced the crescent on the cathedral spire. Bells rang across Europe. Vienna and Rome celebrated the miracle of Esztergom, but in the general's tent, there was no celebration. Count Karl von Mansfeld, architect of this victory, the man who willed this army together through mud, mutiny, and typhus, was dying. He didn't die from a heroic sword wound, but likely from the same dysentery that claimed his soldiers. He'd spent every ounce of life to take this rock, and just as his prize was secured, his body shut down, conquered the city, only to be buried in it. The army he left behind was a shell, fracturing almost immediately. Claudio Monteverdi walked through captured city streets, seeing not glory, but graveyard. The smell of death tasted like copper. He saw friends and enemies entangled in the breach, united only by flies. He saw famine-stricken civilian faces. This was the long war reality. You fight for years, spend millions, sacrifice thousands, and get a ruined castle and a dead general. The strategic map had changed, but the war wasn't over. It would drag on another decade, grinding up more men in cities until both empires were too exhausted to continue. Montiard survived. He packed his viola, da gamba, shook Hungarian mud off his boots, and returned to Italy's glittering courts. But he didn't return the same man. You cannot watch thousands rot in trenches and see cities burn without it changing your soul. Historians debate what sparked the transition from calm Renaissance polyphony to emotional, turbulent Baroque drama. Part of the answer lies in Esztergom's trenches. When Monteverdi later published his 8th book of madrigals, he introduced style, concitato, the agitated style, repeating notes simulating galloping horses, clashing swords, battles, heart-pounding terror. It was the sound of Esztergom's siege translated into music. Horror turned into modern opera's birth. The long war dragged on another 11 agonizing years, ending in 1606 with the Peace of Gietveld. Here's history's punchline. After 13 years of slaughter, after Mansfeld's death, thousands of dead janissaries and civilians, the border barely moved. The Ottoman Empire didn't collapse. The Habsburgs didn't liberate the Balkans. It was a stalemate written in blood. Esztergom remained Christian for only 10 years before Ottomans retook it in 1605. It then seesawed back and forth for another century. Today, visiting Esztergom, you'll see a magnificent basilica dominating the skyline, built on the fortress ruins we just described. The trenches are gone. Bones are buried deep beneath pavement. Silence has returned. But stories like this matter because they strip away history's gold leaf. We love discussing the Golden Age, the Renaissance, civilization's victory. Forgetting these eras were built on terrified coal miners digging in darkness, janissaries weeping for homes they couldn't remember, and musicians trembling in mud. The Siege of Esztergom wasn't just a battle, it was a collision of worlds, proving empires are fragile, but human suffering is universal. So next time you hear a dramatic, heart-wrenching opera or look at a European map, remember the summer of 1595. Remember the invisible enemy, the Bridge of Fire. And that history isn't just dates and kings, it's rain smells on battlefields and viola sounds against cannon thunder. If this journey into forgotten history corners resonated with you, please subscribe and turn on notifications. I have many more stories from the archives needing to be told, stories of survival, betrayal, and our past's hidden mechanics. Before you go, ponder this question in the comments. Do you think great art like Monteverdi's music requires great suffering to exist? Or is that just a myth we tell ourselves to justify tragedy? I'll see you in the next one.